Let's just go. Are you worried that toxic habits are creeping into your workplace? Think your company culture is starting to sour? You're in the right place. This is the Culture Clinic, where my co-founder Skay and I are constantly learning from HR experts on how to build a culture where people love to work. My name is Joe. I'm the co-founder here at Guusto, and today we're joined by Shelley Da Costa, a 30-year HR expert in rewards and recognition. Shelley, let's dive right into this week's topic.
Thanks, Joe. Great to be here.
Today's topic: what does bad company culture really look like? Can you think about the worst work environment you've experienced in your career, and what was wrong with it?
Worst work environment. I'm going to go with emotional work environment as opposed to physical work environment, because I did work for a mushroom farm. Literally, I did when I was part-time, still going to school, and worked for, I was helping them recruit and hire mushroom pickers. So that was the worst physical environment ever. You can only imagine what that was like. From a physical perspective, what was going on. And for those employees, like I was only there part-time, but employees that are working in the dark down, in a basement all day long, just horrific. But when we really talk about environment a lot more, I know we're talking about the culture that comes from working in an environment that's not positive from an emotional perspective or a mental perspective, right? And when I look back, it's almost like it didn't matter if the company was large or small. The worst environments were always people generated. So it would be a particular leader got hired, or a particular leader got promoted, or came into the organization, or new executive leadership. And then you could see this shift in the environment and where people worked and how they felt about working there. And in some cases, it was really quite interesting, because you could be working for a company that was known for an amazing, strong culture, and even travel globally within that culture and see elements of a great work environment. But then within one particular country or one particular area, based on the leadership, you could see some very negative culture there. How about you?
I have the benefit or not the benefit of having, not really worked for a lot of companies, because I've basically worked for a company that I started for most of my career. But in your explanation of, some bad work environments, it kind of triggered a few things. So when I was in my early 20s, I actually worked on a farm when I was working or living in Australia. To extend my visa in Australia, I had to work on a farm, and I worked doing all sorts of things, from picking watermelon and passion fruit. I didn't know what passion fruit was until I went to Australia, picked basil, and we worked for this farmer who was just a maniac. He was I can't even explain how horrible he was to work for. He would scream at us, and he would yell at us. He would throw bunches of basil at us, and we had to keep that job if we wanted to extend our visa. So we just kind of had to take it. And every day we'd come back from the farm just like beaten, not only physically but emotionally. It was such a horrible experience.
It's fascinating because they're similar to my examples in that individuals kind of caused it. Like it was one particular individual. So when you were working on the farm in Australia, you might have gotten along really well with your colleagues, and here you're learning. It's kind of neat. Oh, that's what passion fruit is, and that's what that's like. But it's that one individual that kind of creates that problem. So that seems to really be that common theme. And you spoke the language. Can you imagine migrant workers where you don't speak the language and what that must be like?
And so this actually makes me think, right? Like I can't say in either of those scenarios the culture was bad, because actually there was a camaraderie amongst my fellow colleagues who were also enduring abuse, basically, on the farm. So the culture at the employee level was quite good, but our boss was terrible to work for. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, Shelley, is there a difference between a bad company culture and a toxic company culture?
So toxic's an interesting word. It's a bit of a buzzword these days. A lot of people use it. In my mind, it's more extreme, and it often tends to be tied to almost like a psychological sense of you don't feel trust while you're working there. People feel unsafe psychologically. They don't feel like they can bring their whole selves to work or really tell what's going on in their lives because they'll be judged. And I think what we've been talking about for sure is that individuals within what could be a positive culture can make it toxic for other individuals. Based on, but it's kind of interchangeable. A bad culture, a toxic culture, it's what makes sense to you with the words that you want to use. Toxic just seems a lot more extreme. And it's the word people want to use most often to describe something so vile they want to leave, but they almost feel they can't too, because they need that job, or they're just, hoping that that person will eventually leave, or something will eventually be done about them. But you see pockets of toxic or toxicity, if you will, within a good culture. And that's really, really hard because or you saw a good culture at some point in time. And yet this one individual or a senior leadership team or whatever is causing this problem.
And so do you think that one person can create a toxic culture?
They can. I mean, most often it's somebody at a senior level, unfortunately, because they can kind of control what's rewarded and what isn't rewarded and the kind of behaviors and values. And it takes a lot for that person to leave the organization, if you will. Not to be said that it can happen at other levels and within cliques and groups and teams in the organization. You see that. We often see it most often where we promote somebody that's very good at doing something particular within their role, and they get promoted to manager or they get promoted to leading people, but really are not a good leader, right? So they're very good at what they do, we talk about those in human resources. It's just how to stop that from happening. That person cannot lead people. And the longer they're allowed to, the greater the toxicity grows, and the more great people leave and the more bad people get hired. And I shouldn't say bad people, but people that are also toxic because they're following those kinds of values and behaviors that have been allowed to kind of grow. And that's why I think people like the word toxic, because it's kind of almost that organic nature of what can happen with it in the organization.
Do you think that a company can have a bad culture without having bad intentions?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Very few companies start out and say, we don't want to treat people well, or we're going to, have this happen. I think most of the time they don't even see what can be toxic. And they're assuming that the right people have been hired, and they, when you say that company, is it the leadership team? Is it HR? Who's kind of looking at, wow, we've got some real problems in that particular area and what's going on, and then how to address it. But it's almost never that situation that they set out that way. It happens because they hire somebody and that person gets promoted, and that person wasn't a true follower, devout of the culture that's in place and the behaviors that they want, and then it's allowed. And I often say you can really see it in the recruitment stage, especially with executives often hiring based on the questions they're asking. When you're in the hiring process, a lot of times as a leader in compensation and rewards, I'd get asked to speak to those executives or those senior people. And, based on the questions they would ask about their package or what was going to happen in the organization, I would see red flags in terms of, you want to know about the corner office and you want to know about the espresso machine in your office, or are you going to have a cooler and a small bar fridge? Like, that doesn't kind of fit the company's culture. And it's amazing how you could, try to raise alarm bells, but people are like, no, this person's fabulous. It's a huge catch that we're hiring this person. It's great. And then everybody wonders a few months later why it didn't work out. They just were the wrong fit for the organization. And what's even worse is if they're allowed to continue in those behaviors and hire people like-minded with them as well, then you've got, that toxic workplace because it continues to grow.
So I think about sort of bad culture and toxic culture. I'm really trying to differentiate the two. And one thing that comes to mind for me is that bad culture could be when decisions are made, and that could be at the company level or even at the individual level by a leader or manager, and those decisions are made without considering how it will impact people. That's one thing that comes to mind for me when thinking about bad culture. And then, toxic to me just feels bigger and almost as if somebody or the organization is almost sinister or working against someone or your people, right? Like, I want to look good, so I'll make them look bad, or I don't know, just this cutthroat environment. Yeah. And so, I don't know, I want to spend another second on this to see if we can kind of like really differentiate between bad culture and toxic culture.
I agree with you. It's hard to imagine that people are overtly, consciously sinister in the workplace. I think, we want to assume good intention and everybody's trying to do their best. But I agree with you. One of the big red flags are not looking at the impact of what their actions are, not looking at the impact of their words, not looking at the impact of when I'm the senior leader in this organization and I say this at a meeting, how it's going to make other people at that meeting feel that don't feel included or don't feel like they can, understand that or what have you. So that can feel very sinister. But I think it would be in extreme cases where the person purposely, you know what I mean? It's like, feels like an episode of Mean Girls type of an environment. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen, especially where you can have, I don't want to say retail per se, but we've got large groups of employees and you can have groups and cliques and things like that.
Okay, so let's try and take it a step further here. What factors, in your opinion, contribute the most to a bad workplace culture?
Turning a blind eye to things, for sure. Toxic leaders, allowing it to permeate and to go on, and not hiring to the values and not paying attention to employment equity and diversity, inclusivity, those kinds of things. Just not continuing to grow and learn and having the wrong attitude about your people and what they can bring to light and how important your employees are.
So studies show that on average, about 70% of people leave an organization because of a bad relationship with their manager. So people leave managers, not companies. What are your thoughts around, the impact that managers have? Is it that a lot of managers don't know how to manage? We hear a lot that managers aren't giving enough recognition or showing enough appreciation.
Yeah, well, that one's huge because managers are your culture bearers. I mean, hopefully all employees are, but they're the ones really leading the way. That's why we call them leaders, right? So they should be walking the talk and leading first with those behaviors that are important to the organization so that they need to model the behavior that we want to see in all of our employees in the organization. And if they're not, then we've got some culture issues, and definitely, so if we want that culture of recognition, we want that culture of acknowledging how great people are and what they can do and what they can bring. We want those leaders recognizing people, and we want those leaders to feel recognized themselves. So you want to reward and recognize for the right thing.
Yeah, you said something there that really stood out to me, and that is that we need to recognize those leaders as well. I think that often it's forgotten that we need to show leaders what great looks like. So I'm curious, Shelley, are there any elements of bad culture that a lot of companies overlook or even believe to be positive?
I think one in particular comes to mind, and that is, we read about it a lot these days, in that busyness ethic, the workaholic, slaving away, putting in 12-hour days. And that's great because we met the deal, or we completed it on time, or we got this done, and you've got walking wounded in your, or they may not even be walking in your organization as a result. But it's like that busyness as a badge of honor. I'm doing my emails at night, and I'm working on the project on the weekends because I don't have any time. And that's almost reward. Hey, how you doing? Oh, I worked all night. I thought, oh, wow, me too. All right. And you create this culture where somebody who, can't do that, doesn't want to do that. That's not healthy. That's not good. It's feeling, I don't fit here. Because it seems like unless I'm on with everybody on Slack at night, talking away where they're, doing this mini meeting in the workplace, off hours, then I don't belong. It's almost back to if I don't golf and that's where all the decisions are made out on the golf course, then I don't belong, right? And so I think that's a really big example of where it can create a bad company culture, but it's too often rewarded or overlooked that this is what you're doing. And that, leaders will say to their employees, it's okay, I don't need you to respond to me till morning, but, I have to get my emails out. So I'm going to do this tonight because that's how I work, and that's right. Or watch who's rewarded and who's recognized. Are they the people that are always busy as opposed to, really looking at what's accomplished, what are people getting done, and what's the expectations?
A few years ago, right? Like senior leaders, our leaders, I have to be honest, I was not thoughtful around when I would send messages, for example, not because I wanted people to work after hours or work themselves to the ground. I just didn't really think about the impact that might have on the person receiving the message, right? Or what that was signaling. And so people probably felt like they needed to respond to me right away. And so our people leader, Noah, flagged that and said, like, hey, we need to think about how and when we're communicating with people and what that's doing to sort of like signal when and how hard they should work hard. A couple other things that you mentioned that I thought of. There's this get shit done mentality that sort of like glamorizes workaholism. And, I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't get shit done, but we should get shit done, not at the expense of our people and our the joy that we have in life, right? And then to take that a step further, being a founder or co-CEO at a company, there are colleagues who wear this lack of sleep as like a badge of honor. I sleep 4 hours a night, and I get up and I do the thing and I work till dark, and it's like, yeah, I did that for a while, and it's soul crushing. And last question on the board. So what are the best steps you can take to turn a bad company culture around?
I think we go back to setting clear behaviors and values that the company stands for, right? Really that big think around who are we and what do we tolerate and what do we not tolerate, and hire accordingly for that. I think it's also really important for leaders, for human resources, to keep your ear to the ground in the organization. Find out how people are really feeling about the culture. Do they understand it? Do they know it? Do they live it? Do they feel that all people live it? Do they feel that the leaders are living that with their leaders or the executive? Do they trust? Do they feel they can bring their whole selves? And you can do that ear to the ground with your one-on-ones with your employees. You can do that with surveys and engagement surveys, pulse surveys. And it's a great one. Sometimes every once in a while, they have just some focus groups. Hey, we want to talk about company culture. Let's have some focus groups and have people get together and talk about what feels right about the culture, what doesn't. Do they ever feel unsafe in the culture? Those kinds of things. And then respond accordingly.
Would you ever use like Glassdoor reviews, for example, as a pulse check?
Absolutely. And what, Glassdoor, anything else that's going on in social media that employees are chatting about, look at your Slack channels, look at your Yammer, those pieces. And even on LinkedIn, it's a great indicator, I think, of an employee posting on LinkedIn how proud they are to work for their organization. that something happened or that they received a recognition at their organization and how it makes them feel. Because they're going out now to the world, on LinkedIn, talking about their company and how much they like working for it and what it means to them. That's really big. That's another ear to the ground, looking at those kinds of things. So follow your employees on LinkedIn, see what they have to say.
And what role do you think recognition plays in turning bad company culture around?
Oh, it's huge because, if you're launching new behaviors, you're launching a new culture or a twist to your culture, or you want to relaunch the culture. Recognition is one of the best ways to kind of get that out there and praise people for modeling those behaviors, right? Because you can have leaders say, "Oh, Shelley, I see that, you put your hand up and jumped on that team, and, being a part of a team and working as a team is one of our great, that's something that's part of our culture and that's really important to us. See, you're doing that. So boom, award, recognize." Even peer-to-peer, all of those kinds of things. Recognition gives you that platform to allow you to reinforce the behaviors of your employees. And face it, so much of culture is all about behaviors. And recognition tools allow you to reinforce those behaviors, praise those behaviors, and recognize them.
We hear from companies all the time that it's not only transformative, but cost-effective.
Correct. Right. And transformative for culture is a big win.
Just end on that soundbite right there. Changing your company culture isn't just good for the people working for you. It can also drive gains in innovation, productivity, and other areas. We actually talk more about this in our new guide, Culture is the Ultimate Advantage, where we explain how culture acts as the great multiplier that can give you an edge over your competitors in every part of your business. Click the link in the description to get your copy. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please hit the like button and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Don't forget to recognize someone for a job well done today. Mucho gusto.